Another player who did swap one of Europe's top leagues for the Scottish Premiership, next on our list is Arne Engels, the Celtic midfielder. He has kept his spot, Ewan, as the most valuable player in the Scottish top flight. He's moved from 18 million euros to 20 million euros. Obviously part of that title-winning team for Celtic. 14 goals and assists in 45 games for Celtic. And perhaps a perfect example of what we're talking about here, where we're talking about players that are in demand. Not only has Engels been linked with moves to Lazio and Dortmund in recent months, but there was very clear interest in January, and we suspect that there probably be something similar in the summer transfer window.
Yeah, and we had that conundrum just after the January window when we looked at it, and Nottingham Forest submitted bids in excess, the whole package of them in excess of, I think it was 23 million euros. There's obviously so many factors at play when we look at market values, but that was a deadline day. They submitted a few bids, so there was an element of it was late in the window. I'm not going to say desperation, because clubs don't spend in excess of 20 million euros on a player when they're desperate, but that probably had a little factor in his market value back then. But he deserves to go up. There's been huge interest from Europe, and Arne Engels, he's played in the Bundesliga. Again, his profile, he's a good age. He's a midfielder that can play a number of roles in there. I mean, again, when we look at Celtic's history, they do have history of flipping players for fees and well in advance of 20 million euros. I think maybe a good side point for Arne Engels will be Matt O'Reilly. Now, I don't think Engels will get the same fee that O'Reilly did, which was just under 30 million euros. But he is a player, midfielder, can score goals. There's huge interest in him, and I'd imagine that he could be on the move this summer. I think Celtic were right not to sell him in January, because they couldn't at that point in the season. They were, unfancied in the title race, and ultimately he's played a role in them winning the title. So, yeah, I think a very, very good player, Arne Engels. Again, he's split opinion in Scotland, but I think that's more to do with his style. He's kind of a languid player. He's not a guy that's going to run about 100 miles an hour and smash into tackles. But a really talented footballer, and there's definitely a market for him.
Yeah, he's one of those kind of curious players, and this often happens at Celtic and Rangers, where they're maybe not the most technically gifted, so they're maybe a wee bit overlooked, but then they end up in somewhere like the Premier League, and then they end up being very useful kind of workhorses, if you will. Someone like Ryan Christie or Stuart Armstrong comes to mind in that regard. And it's also worth bearing in mind that Celtic, despite winning the title, will almost certainly be making a huge overhaul of that squad, so they'll probably need to sell players to finance some new deals.